7:02 and we are recording. Get set. Okay. We're gonna call the meeting to order. This is the Planning Commission meeting for April 4th, 2024. And I'm gonna do roll call. Drummond is here, Kazuki. Here. Kazuki. And Commissioner Hargreaves.
Yes.
All right, and then if you guys would like to stand and say the Pledge of Allegiance with us. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Sorry. Okay, and I just want to make an announcement that due to some prior commitments, tonight's meeting will need to adjourn at 9 p.m. due to a loss of quorum. As such, the public comment opportunities will occur at open forum for anything that's not on the agenda and during new business as instructed. The Planning Commission will not be taking public comment during the reports and information portion of the meeting, as that will be limited to Planning Commission discussion. Due to time limitations, there will be a 5-minute time limit requested for each speaker. All right, and so with that, we're going to move on to the agenda approval. So commissioners, do you have, or staff, does anybody have anything that needs to be amended on the agenda? Okay, and with that, I will entertain a motion to approve the agenda for tonight. Second. All right, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, say nay. Okay, and we're going to move into the open forum then. This is an opportunity for anyone who's here tonight to approach the podium and address the commission with anything that's not on the agenda already tonight. Is there anyone here who would like to speak during open forum?
And then, Madam Chair, we do need to approve the minutes.
Oh, thank you. I was going to do that next.
Okay.
But I will, no, it's okay. It's number 5, but we'll do that now. Unless there is anything that anybody needs to amend, I will entertain a motion to approve the Planning Commission minutes from March 12th, 2024.
Second.
All right, all those in favor? Aye. And those opposed? Okay. That's approved. And no one moved during open forum, but I'm going to give you the other opportunity so that we're back in line with the agenda. Does anyone have anything that they would like to approach the Planning Commission with that's not on the agenda for tonight? Okay, we'll keep moving then. What we are going to do next is agenda item 6C is not a public comment opportunity.
Sorry,
Public hearing, excuse me. It's not a public hearing, but we are going to allow for public comment. So if there's anyone here who wants to make a public comment regarding agenda item 6C, now is the opportunity, and that is the Red Barn Pet Retreat variance. It's not a public hearing, that particular agenda item, so we're allowing anyone who's here who would like to make a comment on that agenda item to approach the podium and make comment on that issue right now. The discussion for that issue will take place, but at that point in time, we won't be taking public comment. So that's why it's a little bit out of order, because it's not an actual public hearing.
We
Yep.
have questions.
Perfect.
The map that we sent out.
Yeah, like,
So
very-
I don't have a comment, but it's not very
understand
we
what
on
you're
the
talking
same.
about.
Okay, so there will be a staff report that happens during the time that we get to agenda 6C, the Red Barn Pet Retreat variance. So what I would suggest is, if you're interested in that, if you would stick around for the staff report and then the discussion that takes place with the commission. At that point in time, if your questions aren't answered, you can always send an email or come in and talk to any.
I apologize.
No,
Madam
intervene.
Chair, I can speak to the map real quick. So basically, the blue is the site that we're discussing, the Red Barn Pet Retreat. And then all those red selected properties around it are within the 500-foot radius to receive notice of the meeting occurring. So that's simply what the map is showing. But that's what the map is, so if that answers your question, but, so you don't have to wait for that question to be answered.
Okay, and with that, we'll move on to agenda item 6A, which staff, do we just need to make a motion to approve that?
Yeah, so I can speak to that. So the applicant and staff are continuing to work through some alignment with another property that will also be going through the subdivision process right around the same time. So that item is still being worked through. They have requested an extension of an additional 60 days, which puts their review deadline out into July. At this time, they're hoping to be placed on the May agenda. So because we already mailed out public hearing notices,
Okay.
we do have to make a motion to continue the public hearing to May 6th.
Okay, does that make sense? Okay, all right, and so then I will make that motion to continue the public hearing for the Chastec Farm to May 6th of 2024. All right, all those in, well, it passes, right? Because we have a first and a second. All those who vote, all those approve say aye. And anyone opposed say nay. All right. No, he was just along with us. Okay. And that brings us to item 6B, which is the Sharber Garage Conditional Use Permit. And up first is staff report.
Yeah, so thank you, Chair Brumman. Item 6B tonight is a conditional use permit request for the Sharper Garage CUP. The applicant is James Sharper. He's the property owner, and he's requesting approval of a conditional use permit to allow an accessory building to be built in his side yard with sidewalls that exceed the 10-foot sidewall height limit. The property in question is 6650 Pioneer Trail. So, like I said, the structure is being proposed to be placed in the side yard, and it does exceed all the required setbacks. So that's the side setback. The closest is, I think, like 90 feet, and the rear one is 78 feet. The accessory structure footprint itself, he's proposing a footprint of 1,530.67 square feet, which is just a shade under what the allowance is for his property, which is 1,531 square feet. Again, the proposed sidewall height for the garage is 16 feet, which can be allowed through the CUP. And while the sidewall height does exceed that 10-foot limit, it doesn't, the structure height itself doesn't exceed the zoning district height limit of 35 feet. The applicant is proposing pre-finished steel panels for the siding and the roofing, which staff finds that the standards of section 1030 and 1070.020 for the conditional use permit have been met with the proposed conditions. So pretty standard with most of these requests for the taller sidewall heights. Staff would suggest that a conditional approval should be added that the structure can't be used for commercial or accessory living purposes without first obtaining the proper city approvals. And during our analysis, we noticed that there are two existing sheds that are on the property, one that has a square footprint of 89.25 square feet and the other one with 114.14 square feet. City code allows for one of these sheds to not count towards the allowance of the allowed footprint of 1531. So as it stands right now, if the new shed were to be constructed and the two sheds were to remain on the property, then the property would be out of compliance. So I brought that up to the applicant, and he has notified me that he plans to remove the southern shed after the construction of the new garage. So a condition of approval should require that the existing shed be removed within 30 days of completion of the new garage. And additionally, the applicant should deposit an additional escrow of $1,000 to be held by the city, which would be released once the shed is removed from the property. And so at this time, staff recommends that you open the public hearing and take testimony. And then staff recommends that you approve or recommend for approval of the draft resolution with the added conditions that I had previously explained.
Right, thank you. And at this time, then we will go ahead and open up the public hearing for the Sharber Garage Conditional Use Permit. So anyone who would like to make public comment, please approach the podium, state your name and address, and then share your thoughts with us, and just please remember to keep it around 5 minutes. Is there anyone who would like to address this particular issue? And we didn't receive any cards.
Nope.
Okay, so then I would make a motion to close the public hearing. Do I have a second? All right, all those in favor, say aye. Anyone opposed? Okay. So now we get to have any discussion if necessary. Is there someone who would like to take the lead on that?
I think it looks pretty straightforward and it looks like there's tree screening from the neighbor's property, so I wouldn't think it would be impinging on their property at all. It's a pretty good sized lot. It's just the total height is within the range. So, yeah, I'm okay with it.
So am I.
At the only, and it's I feel like we're ready to make a motion on this issue. The question that I would have is, I feel like this is number 3.
Yeah.
Okay, so the only reason I want to highlight that is if we're looking at things that need to be addressed, potentially, this is maybe one of the ones that we're seeing most often, is that the conditional use permit because of the sidewall height. Okay, so with that being said, does anyone want to make a motion to approve the Sharber Garage CUP?
Yeah, I'll make that motion. To approve the Schreiber CUP.
With the staff conditions of
With the staff.
approval?
Yes. Thank you.
I'll second.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
And anyone opposed? Nay. Okay, and that takes us to agenda item 6C, which is the Red Barn Pet Retreat variance.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is Pet Barn. I guess you were the only one on the council or on the commission last fall, but if you're in the next slide, this is on Stieg Road and 101 on the northwest corner. The applicant's requesting approval of a variance to allow development of the parcel within the metropolitan urban service area, the MUSA, in advance of municipal water being available to serve the property. Sanitary sewers available today, but not municipal water. Last September, the council approved the comprehensive plan amendment rezoning, preliminary plat and conditional use permit and site plan to allow development of the Red Barn Pet Retreat, which is an expansion of an existing doggy daycare just down the road. Next slide. This is the site plan, just for reference, that was approved, and the utilities are available, as I said. Both sewer and water are stubbed, but the water connection is not available because we're still building the treatment plant and the water tower. So next slide. They would like to begin construction this spring and open in the fall. And a variance is requested because the city water system will not be online until estimated to be operational by the end of this year. So there's a period of time where they would have to wait until that's operational. We cannot issue a building permit without water. We talked with Maple Grove, that would require an amendment to our agreement. Staff believes this is the best path forward. The applicant will provide a private well and a water suppression system in the interim. So they will have water and fire suppression, and they will be required to connect when water is available. And staff finds, as outlined in the staff report, that in this case, the variance standards have been met. Next slide. And we do recommend approval of the draft resolution approving the variance to allow development in the MUSA in advance of municipal water. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. And so because this is not a public hearing item, then we can just go right into any discussion that the commission may have. I will say that I was at the initial concept meeting when it was presented to council, and then when it came before the commission as well. And this was a discussion item that we talked about at that time. And the commission did at that time vote to allow the variance. We're in favor of offering the variance, and then just with the stipulation that once water became available, that they would hook up to water. So that's the history as I know it. So as it sits, I am ready to make a motion unless other commissioners have discussion they'd like to bring up.
I have a couple of questions. The properties that are east of 101, what are those zoned as?
East of 101 is
Yes.
Maple Grove. I don't know the answer to that. Do you have any?
No, I think they're residential properties, but I don't know Maple Grove zoning.
Oh, okay. I would,
Residential, maybe some public, institutional.
okay. And perhaps this has already been gone over, and since I'm new, I'm gonna ask the question anyhow.
Ask away.
But on sheet 3 of the design sheet that was submitted, there's dashed line indicates a cul-de-sac. What are those properties gonna be developed further? And do we know what those are? We do, okay.
Kendra, would you like to address
I
that?
would, so that is not part of the discussion item today, and I'm happy to meet, and talk through that, but that was discussed with the preliminary plat. Yes, that is a right of way that's planned, and the applicant intends to use that land as part of the Red Barn Pet Retreat now. That'll be walking trails, but long-term, that can be developed with, commercial,
Okay.
uses.
So that's already been discussed.
Yeah.
Like I said, I have no
Yeah,
history
yeah,
with this, so
yeah.
I'm just gonna fire away.
Yep, and happy to chat offline too, but yes, that would need a new plat to subdivide this lot to create that
Okay.
in the future. But we are planning for that with the cul-de-sac.
And one final question, when it comes to some of the environmental issues, such as, light pollution, animal waste and all that business, is that gonna be discussed at a later date, or has that already been discussed?
Yes, that was part of the September discussion. They are required to comply with section 1060 of the city code, which establishes our lighting standards. And they did have a plan for how they deal with the animal waste that was. part
Yeah,
of
I have a
that
whole
Conversation, yep,
list of things.
Yep.
Since it's already been discussed,
yep.
I don't
And then,
need to.
Natalie can get that packet, or you can look up that packet
I can
from
look it up.
September, and happy to chat about it too.
I'm fine, thank you.
Okay, so I will make a motion then to approve the variance for the Red Barn Pet Retreat. City file number 24-007.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? So moved. Okay, and then that takes us to reports and information, other business. Agenda item 7A, number 1.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this is a discussion item for the planning commission related to a commercial and industrial district standards update that was started in 2023. So in 2023, City Council identified a goal to adopt new standards for underlining zoning for commercial industrial land uses. And this would impact 7 districts in our code as outlined, including our commercial, rural commercial, neighborhood commercial, community commercial, business park, light industrial, our downtown mixed use area, as well as the general mixed use area. An initial work plan was adopted on November 20th of 2023. And then the planning commission had an initial discussion on December 5th of last year. That was mostly related to looking at some of the standards and uses. And at that time, the commission asked for a table of uses to be brought back so that some additional discussion could be had to compare uses across districts. Since that time, staff completed a business community survey, which is sent to either business owners in the city or landowners within these districts. And that was open through January 2024. The results of that are expected to go to council next council meeting on the 20th, not next, so 2 council meetings on April 25th. And then since that time, a question has come up of how development rates are to or to not be applied in our rural commercial district. And the city, after that, adopted an interim ordinance on March 14th to address that question. And then subsequently, just a couple weeks ago, on the 28th, a revised work plan was adopted, and that was outlined in the staff report for you. So we're looking at basically 3 stages, but tonight we're gonna try to address all 3 topics. So related to task 1, development rights in rural commercial in our transitional rural commercial area. I provided some background on development rights in the staff report. And I'm happy to clarify any questions the commission might have in regards to that. But basically, the questions we're asking tonight is, what are the planning commission's thoughts about moving away from the practice of using development rights as a way to limit development density or intensity in the rural area of the city? Particularly when it relates to our commercial rural and transitional rural commercial district, there really is no discussion at this time about moving away from the residential side. And then should the city move away from using development rights? What do we think about the minimum lot size of 2.5 acres in the rural commercial district? Does that need to be increased to what? So just something to keep in mind is lots and development do need space to accommodate stormwater. In this area, they have to accommodate 2 septic system sites, a primary and an alternate. There are parking needs, and we also want to make sure that the lots are buildable and usable lots. And uses within this district regularly need exterior storage. This is where we allow contractors operations and similar uses that rely on exterior storage. And that's not allowed in all of our commercial or industrial districts. Allowed to some limits in some, and then others it's outright not allowed. So, and then if we do move with a larger minimum lot size, does that make sense for all uses in the district? For example, if we move to 5 acres, is that something we want to see for gas stations and daycares versus contractors' operations? Other district standards changes we could consider at this time would be the impervious surface coverage limit of 50% in setbacks. Do those make sense with a larger lot size? And then if a 50-acre, so these are some questions on just the practicalities of how we would apply it. So right now, if a 50-acre lot with 5 development rights is partially rezoned to commercial rural or transitional commercial rural, how do we handle the assigned development rights? Do those just go away, or what exactly happens to those? And then in the instance of a 50-acre lot with 3 development rights, because 2 were previously used, and then 10 acres are rezoned to a commercial rural district, how do we handle the assigned development rights when it's not clear, like they already used some, and if we're going to take some of the land, is it proportional assignment, or do we just reassign it based on the land acreage at that time that would remain rural residential? And then how should the city handle the concern that people, particularly those who already used or exhausted development rights, will request to rezone to commercial rural once it's understood no development rights are needed if they're rezoned? Are there some areas in the city where some additional commercial rural areas make sense? And then any other feedback for the city council's consideration. And so we can come back to these slides when we're ready to start. And then task 2 is looking at our mini storage. We have a storage moratorium right now. The last planning commission, and obviously we have 2 new planning commissioners, so we can definitely reevaluate those. But at the last planning commission, I believe the direction or recommendation was to move away from allowing storage in terms of mini storage and self-storage uses. Is that still the case? Do we have some additional thoughts at this time? An alternate would be to consider additional standards for mini storage or self-storage. I believe I outlined a couple of options in the staff report, and I also provided our existing standards as well for reference. And then for task 3, it's the comprehensive review of commercial and industrial districts. I would ask that the planning commission affirm the summary I provided on pages 2 to 3 of the staff report, that is their accurate understanding. And then if there's any additional information that would like to be added at this point to forward to council, we can certainly do that. And then the table of uses was created. And so some questions for the table of uses: where is there room for simplification? I think there's quite a bit of room, and I'd love to get your feedback on that. What uses are missing from the table? What does or does not make sense for you, or where does it or does it not make sense for use to be included in one district over another? And then what uses should or should not be permitted versus conditional or interim use? So happy to answer questions. I also, for reference, I have our zoning map, our future land use map, and development rights map if you want to refer to that at all. So.
Thank you, Natalie. Okay, so it is time for us to begin our discussion. So I think it's best if we take a look at each item. And because of our time tonight, we'll just kind of go with the discussion. But if we approach a time when I want to make sure we have time for all three, so I'll just kind of ward us off if one seems to be taking over the other. And so I'd like to open it up for who would like to ask their questions or to just share their comments.
This on task one.
This would be on one, which is the development rights in the commercial, rural, or commercial transitional rural. Correct. If you have any questions for clarification on what that process works, feel free to ask.
Yes, right now, the minimum acreage is 2.5 acres for rural commercial. Is that what I understand?
Correct. So historically, how it's been applied is, we have commercial lots that show development rights on them. And we have instances where it's been applied where if they try to subdivide, we did use development rights to subdivide to balance the overall intensity with the lower lot size of 2.5 acres. But the minimum lot size at this time is 2.5 acres for that district.
Is that mainly to be able to situate a well and a septic on it? Because you need that
That is
minimum distance.
Definitely part of it,
And
yes.
then parking is the other part of it.
Mhm.
Have we found that that's enough? Or it could be less possibly in certain situations?
Personally, I wouldn't recommend going less. We do have an existing, our existing industrial area here off of 116 and 10, that corner. They have lots that they range in size, but some of them I think are as low as about 2.5 acres, and
Yeah,
it's,
the meat locker that used to be there. Was
that one's
probably
even
a
less, yeah,
fairly
that
small
one's
lot.
very small, and they've had a very hard time, moving forward with it. I think when you're on sewer and water, you can have them more consolidated, but when you're dealing with, an area where sewer and water is not available, bigger lots tend to be better.
If it is small businesses like that, do they ever have where the business shares with the neighboring business? And you can use the combined acreage to situate a well, like share the well with 2 or 3 properties, share the septic, or is that not a thing?
So, my understanding is shared septic is not ideal. And typically where we've allowed shared septic, we do allow for it in our open space and preservation plat, but all of a sudden it triggers the need for planned unit development because of the additional agreements that need to be put in place to be able to upkeep that. And then there's been, my understanding is there's been other communities that have seen significant failures with community septic. So again, I wouldn't recommend that for a commercial lot. I don't know, and I guess about the well, that might be a little more discussion, but I would say it's probably better for each, if it's not a part of a association, it's probably better that they have their own wells on these individual lots.
I have a question.
Mhm.
I would assume that the city went through quite a bit of effort identifying the 2.5 as a development right. And my question would be, how does that have, if, you know, I was looking at the map that was included in the item where it has all the development rights associated for each property. How does that impact or does it impact the master planning of the city, or doesn't it impact the master plan?
Well, I think that's some of the questions that we're asking, because I think right now, the 2.5 acre minimum lot size for commercial rural has been offset historically with the use of development rights. These development rights were initially assigned to the original parcels at a rate of 1. Well, I shouldn't say original. It's changed a couple times and it's been a difficult program to track. And I think I discussed that in the staff report. So it's not a perfect system, but it is the system that we're working with. And overall, it does provide some flexibility because sometimes some uses or some landowners would like to carve off a smaller chunk, which they can do. They don't need to have a 10 acre minimum lot size. But then to keep the density and intensity overall, the development rights kind of work in conjunction with that minimum lot size. And so the benefit of moving away from the development rights for rural commercial uses is it allows for more commercial users. The downside is some of the things that I outlined in the staff report is how exactly does that work when we use development rights already? Are there areas that we would consider for possible rezoning in the future? And it might be better to kind of think that through now, especially if someone already has an outlot that has exhausted all development rights and really was never meant to be developed, but maybe they're on a corner of two county roads and they would now like to rezone it as commercial. And is that something that we would like to open the door to? Because now they wouldn't need development rights once it's zoned as commercial under a scenario where we move away from the development rights.
And will that cause a lot of the rural residential to be rezoned as rural commercial?
I mean, the city
Because
has,
that's the way to
the city
get
has
development.
control over it, the city has discretion over it, but I think that it could open the door to more requests. And so what do we want to be intentional about where would that make sense to entertain that request? Because anyone can request a rezoning, and so I think I know of a few property owners who have a fair amount of land left, but they've already carved off a number of pieces. And so now they're down to 3 development rights or however many development rights, and they have, you know, multiple acres, and they would like to do something, and they feel like that the rural residential, they're kind of waiting for an update in the program. And I think that would probably be some of the first people to request that they be rezoned to commercial if this were to go through. So
I think a lot of what would keep people from doing it too is access. I mean, we have large lots out there and you may have the back of your property that you'd like to do something with, but there's no access to it.
these properties have county road
So
access.
they have to have access, I think, is one thing
Mhm.
that limits the ability to take rural residential and make it commercial. Because if you don't have the access, or if it's in a neighborhood that's basically all rural residential, then there wouldn't be an opportunity for somebody to take and carve off the back of their property for commercial. Or there may be if they could submit an application for that.
I think you'd be able to rezone it without the development rights. I think it would, if we're talking about, it's kind of hard to talk about an actual parcel in front of us. But I mean, I know for the parcel I have in mind, I don't want to point it out on the map because I'm not trying to put anyone on blast. But they do have county road access. And it's not that the city has to say yes. I'm not trying to say that this is going to completely unravel everything. It's just, how can we be intentional about moving forward if this is what we want to do? So I think talking about access is a good point. And I just think that that's something that could very likely happen, where there'll be at least probably 1 or 2 people who would like to rezone their property because they've already exhausted development rights.
So I'm just gonna address the development right, the shift from that process in and of itself, and I am not in favor. And there are a number of reasons why. And the first is just that it is the same foundation that we use for residential as well as commercial. And so even though we're talking about 2 different zonings, once one is changed, what is to keep the other from being changed? And so that feels to me, because, and I've addressed this in asking, like, why is land not zoned agriculture anymore? And it's been told, well, historically, the development rights were awarded because then that became the landowner's 401k. And so now to shift that for one and not for the other feels like we're either going to eventually end up having to shift it for both, which dramatically changes what our rural residential landscape looks like, or we have to be super clear that the reason for making the change is such that we have enough grit and enough teeth to justify that it was worth separating out from the other program. And I am not confident that the reason that issue has bubbled to the surface has enough teeth in that area. I feel like the I feel like the priority of looking at commercial and industrial standards overall throughout the city has been hijacked a little bit in this narrow focus around this issue. And I just want to make sure that we don't lose sight of that overall, because there's so much here that would have to be looked at. And I would want to make sure that we did it well. That sort of this rushed timeline, I don't think gives us the path forward to do it well, to consider all of the impact, to make sure that that we are planning for access. That I really think that there probably are areas where we might want to rezone commercial residential in the outlying areas, but I think that takes talking to Medina, talking to Hamel, talking to Greenfield. What are their plans, especially all along that 19 area? What are their plans for future development, so that it makes sense what we're doing, and not that it just looks like we rush to make a lot of commercial areas available in the rural. So those are my concerns. That's why I would recommend that at this point in time, that we continue moving forward with the development rights as they've been assigned. However, I am open to a part of the larger discussion around our commercial and industrial, taking a look, especially since what we have coming up is the 2040, 50 plan, that maybe this gets tagged on to say, let's, I know that primarily those look at MUSA areas, right, where municipal sewer and water are available. But if in that same process, we evaluate sort of those areas out in our rural to say, is there any place where we want to extend that commercial? I think that marries really well together at a time frame and a timeline to do that. But to do that with what we were looking at feels rushed and hurried to me. And I'm afraid that we're going to make a mistake that we regret later in the development of the city as a whole.
I have a tendency to agree, because that was, when I started reading about this, it seemed as if the current path seems reasonable. And what you just said makes a lot of sense to me. And I also agree I think we should take this slower and not rush to it. And I don't know what that means, or how that, I'm not sure what that means. But
I like the idea of making the discussion more in line with rezoning or whatever happens with the 2050 comp plan too, because then we're looking at a cohesive view of everything. And it just might be a little easier to put it in the context that it needs to be in, as far as looking 10, 20, 30 years down the line.
And I guess part of what is influencing my thinking is well, right now where that MUSA line comes in is such a stark line, right? Like we've talked about that, applicants who come in and they're right at the edge of that line, and then residents who are on the other side of it that feel like they're, that line is a sharp distinction. And so now if we take this into consideration, suddenly we have, medical office buildings abutted right up to what's rural residential. So like, how does that even change that process moving forward? Now someone's got rural residential on 2 acres, but they aren't in MUSA. I just feel like it would be a little bit of entertaining more issues than we would want to take on, complicating, which bogs us down from really planning the city well, but also achieving some of the things that were on the agenda for this year. If we were to consider, because that's obviously my overarching opinion, but if we were to move forward, with the lot size, so I know that Corcoran has shifted on that minimum lot size a number of times, because I feel like it was 5 at one point in time, then it was 2.5, then some lots were, even if they were 2.5, they had too much low lying area. So all of that to bring up that when you're out in the rural residential, the amount of space you need, I would not be in favor of reducing that minimum. And I even with at this point in time, even regardless of the usage, like I think about a gas station and I think about a childcare, and they're certainly not going to necessarily need that amount of space, but they do have to have well and septic, because they're going to need facilities. And so I just don't know how you could do it well in the rural area with less than 2.5 acres. Also, I feel like there are people who intentionally live in the rural area for that lower density. And so then to all of a sudden be increasing the density of commercial, the change happening in the city is already quite difficult for those residents. And so I think then to feel like the commercial is being expedited and intensified, regardless of where, even though they're in the rural area, I think that that would be a difficult people group to consider. And then lastly, my concern overall is and now some people may only go to their grocery store, but I go to my neighbors and my farmers, like that's where I get my food. And so for me, what does the increase of commercial property do to their taxes? And does it only further push our agricultural business out unintentionally? I don't think anyone here is trying to intentionally push that out. But if all of a sudden we intensify or we make it far more desirable to sell, you know what I mean, to turn that business into a commercial rural or a transitional commercial rural, I'm afraid that what we're saying unintentionally is that type of business is far more important to us than our agribusiness and our farmers. So that's my other, just two kind of soft concerns with moving away from the program. We still have some time left to continue discussing this issue, so feel free to jump
I
in.
absolutely agree with, doing what we need to promote our agribusiness in our neighborhood, especially out in our kind of rural area outside the MUSA. The more small market farmers we can get out there, it would be lovely to see Corcoran get a farmer's market. We really don't even have one yet, so, or maybe more than one. So, yeah, the more we can promote something like that and discourage things that would keep that from happening or make that harder for people.
Does anyone else have anything else they would like to specifically talk about in regards to the development rights issue? Otherwise, we'll go on to task 2, which is the mini storage and self-storage.
Madam Chair.
Sorry.
I could, no,
Yes.
you're fine. I think, so I think that's great. I do think it would be
You want us-
helpful to answer some of the questions.
Okay.
Under the assumption that council does want to move away from the development rights so what are some of your thoughts on the practicalities of how we can apply development rights once we kind of have a situation where we're moving away from it?
Okay, so if they decide to move away from the development rights as it is, we're gonna take a look at some of the questions that they have, and that is primarily, what would you like to see the minimum lot size as? Do you want to see it increased, or? You basically have on here that you've called out 1 acre, but are we operating on 1 acre or 2.5?
That was a typo.
Okay.
I looked at the wrong district.
So we're talking about 2.5. Do we
2.5
increase or
acres.
decrease?
So I don't think we should decrease. I don't think that's really the discussion. It's more of, is 2.5 acres enough if we're not balancing it with the development rights anymore?
Have we had requests for rural commercial on 2.5 acres that we don't feel like it's enough, that it should be 5 acres? Are there problems there with hitting what we feel needs to be on there?
Historically, the concern is not initially, but with expansion. With an opportunity, if I'm incorrect.
No,
Like, it's come up.
you're not incorrect. I would say our existing downtown area, I feel like there's a lot of lessons to be learned in that area, and they're all in it's a very consolidated area with smaller lot sizes, and it's not great. And that's even with it, a lot of it being switched to sewer and water more recently, but there's just parking is an ongoing issue, even without buildings expanding. The buildings that we have seen get expanded require variances, a number of variances to be able to do it. In order to be able to retain business within the city, that's kind of, I think the hand kind of gets forced because you want to work with the property owner that's invested into their property to that point, as well as made the choice to locate in Corcoran. So yeah, I think the expansion is a concern, but it's also just the stormwater has been an issue in that area to the point where the city had to purchase some land to correct some of that issue. Within that vicinity, because it wasn't working, and I can't speak to that too much. That would be something Kevin Matson, our public works director, can, but I know that we had to purchase some land, acquire some land to address some of that. And then, so I think those are some of the parking is a huge one. And then just the long-term viability of the site. This area tends to be looked at for commercial operations quite a bit. not commercial, I'm sorry, contractors operations, contractors yards. And I would say 2.5 acres is
Yeah.
not gonna be enough for a contractor's yard.
Right, yeah, the secondary question that you said is, does a larger minimum lot size make sense for all uses in the district? I don't know that it makes sense for all uses, right? Like, that's maybe where a gas station could fit on 2.5 acres, but certainly not a contractor's operations and not a contractor's operations with an outdoor storage, in order to, yeah, so I would certainly think that for that, you need a, you know, a larger minimum. I guess I'd like to say 5. The Public Works building sits on a 10-acre plat, right?
Do you know that?
5.
I think it's 13, but I'll look.
So it's the larger than 10. And then the D&D, like, are you guys familiar? Have you driven out that direction?
I
10 and
live-
19?
I live in that area.
So, so the Public Works building that's on 19 is on a 10-acre or larger site. I don't believe it's any smaller. And then the D&D, which is that newer contracting that went in across.
That's a big lot.
Yeah, that one's 16.5 acres. Public Works is 11.4 acres. So yeah, they are on larger lots and but sometimes I wonder if 16 acres is enough for D&D, but
I
but
think there was a question for the proposal for the lot that is going to be on 30 and 19 on the northeast corner, that they're developing commercial lots. And that they may be smaller than is needed for what they're developing. I read something about that.
mhm.
Yeah, I think that if we're talking contractor operations, like, I would look at a minimum of 10 acres, with that outdoor storage. However, if somebody, if contractor's good, their business is gonna expand. So I would assume that they'd want to come in big rather than be small and then have to move operations after they've, been on site or in location.
I guess it really depends on the business.
I know, it's
I mean,
really hard to
if
set a
it's not
standard.
Retail business, you really don't need a lot of parking. And I don't know what Corcoran's parking minimums are. Do we have parking minimums? Because sometimes parking minimums are excessive.
There are parking minimums, but they're not just specific to Corcoran. It's an equation that's quite complicated, but it has to do
It
with,
can be very excessive, I
The
think.
parking can be excessive. But then we have businesses in town where they're parking on the streets where we don't allow parking and it's turned into an enforcement nightmare. And so they just simply continue parking where they're not supposed to park. But I think that we can certainly look at the parking standards. That's not really in our current scope right now because our performance standards are outside of district standards. It's definitely something to keep in mind as we consider the minimum lot size. But my concern would be that based on our current experience with consolidated commercial areas that range from 2 to 5 acres or so, we don't have enough parking for those uses.
Are we gonna have an opportunity for public comment at all?
not tonight on this.
So you're gonna keep the public completely out of this?
No, sir,
So you're discussing without any public input at all, and that's not fair. This room could be packed from here to outside with what you're talking about tonight, had people known about it.
so it's there.
Okay?
Yeah, tonight is not a public hearing tonight, so this is just a discussion. It's the preliminary work that's done before anything is ever brought available for public comment, but you're welcome to submit any comments via email or letter to staff. And,
They don't get in the packet.
but it's not a public comment
But they
tonight.
don't get in the packet.
Oh,
They're kept out of the packet.
okay, sir, it's not a public comment tonight, so we're just gonna continue our discussion. So we're taking a look at the next sort of things would be impervious surface coverage limit of 50% or setbacks. Those would be some of the other standards that we'd consider. So does anyone have anything that they would like to speak? You talked about access in terms of making sure that the lots had access. And so in your mind, that is access to county roads or major collector.
Yes, and I think, there's definitely an issue with too many, they only allow so much access off a county road. So even out in our rural area where we have, homes, they're no longer allowing people to build a home and access off a county road, I don't believe. I think you have to have a road off the county road into a neighborhood and then access off there. But I know there's been some things that have come up where they want to create another access off of like County Road 19, and it's not allowed because it's a high-speed highway.
Well, and that gets deferred to Hennepin County is who gets to decide if there's a
That's true, it's a Hennepin County.
Yeah, I think, so I think it makes sense that if we're ever talking about re-guiding, rezoning an area, so having basically a larger acreage be subdivided, I think having nearby access to a county road makes sense. It wouldn't necessarily make sense to require each lot to have
Sure.
direct access to a county
A little
road.
bit more like a frontage road or
Yeah,
something
there would,
that.
yeah, there would have to be,
you
there would
want
have to be something to serve the development, but when we're zooming out and looking at a larger situation where we're talking about rezoning something, then that, I think, does make some sense.
Does Hennepin County provide input regarding that ahead of time? If the city was going to say, we're looking at these areas, transitioning that to something different? Or does the county wait until there's, sort of like how sometimes a concept plan will come before council gets to provide feedback? Does that sort of conversation ever happen with Hennepin County in terms of like, hey, we're thinking about this, we're not necessarily doing it, but we want to know, would you be open to, or does that type of conversation not happen?
I mean, they are sent our comprehensive plan for comment when we start that process. So if we wanted to look at potential additional areas to add as commercial rural or in that area, that would be a chance for them to comment. I don't know that we typically reach out to Hennepin County for changes in land use outside of that. The Met Council would certainly have to be notified of anything that's a comprehensive plan amendment. But the Hennepin County, they typically comment at, sometimes we'll send them sketch plats, we usually do just out of courtesy, and then they definitely comment with a plat, and so that's typically when it gets handled.
So then what, I guess my question is, how then does that impact this process? So if we're looking at access and we're looking at sort of those being the areas where we would consider changing something, if we are limited, we wouldn't know until we're providing them with a plat whether or not they would allow entrance into that.
So they have to, if there's no alternative.
Then they have to approve it.
Allow for some type of access. They
Okay.
can't not allow for access on a property. So with the Corcoran Farms Industrial Park,
Yep.
they didn't allow access at this time for that because it had access on Larkin. But if
So
they,
as long as there was from a back way.
yeah,
Okay.
so if they didn't have Larkin, then, and that was the only option was for some kind of access on County Road 50, then that would have been,
Then they would have had to say,
yes.
this is something that we do.
Yeah.
Okay. I guess for me, that would be one thing to consider as we're trying to decide whether or not we're gonna actually, move into this, would be the number of times, because a lot of these, are larger. The plats that you had on your map, if you were to show it, yeah. Most of them tend to be that large rectangular shape, right? And so there's not a ton of secondary access all the time, I guess. Anyway, that is something that I guess I would consider, because that would be something that you'd want to plan for and plan well.
Mhm.
If you're creating a bunch of access off of your 55-mile-an-hour
Yeah,
roads.
and like Strailer Road is a gravel road. So if you start looking at, rezoning that, that's mainly agricultural there. I mean, they have centuries old dairy farms on that road, so.
Again, it's hard to think about standards without talking about something specific. So
Absolutely. If you.
I'm having a hard time talking about setbacks. Impervious surface, I'm always in favor of less, right? But at the same time, I think, and you'll have to remind me if some of the gravel, like, you know, so say you don't require a paved parking lot or something, especially I'm thinking of a contractor's operation. The gravel is still considered an impervious surface at that point in time, or is it a pervious surface?
That's a great question. I believe it's impervious because that's how.
It doesn't soak in the same as it does on the ground, right? So it's still, so even in that, yeah. I just am having a hard time wrapping my mind around something like that fitting on a small lot. But I could definitely see something making a distinction for a gas station or a childcare operation that has a smaller than the 10 acre lot size. But I think that it would, if we were to do something like that well, then I feel like we would really need to take a look at the examples of what's out there and do some, pretend platting to figure, or, you know what I mean? Pretend developing in our minds to figure out with parking and then the runoff, what is a reasonable size lot.
I'm having
those businesses.
difficulty understanding this without an example. You know, you're talking about specifics without specifics. And that's where I'm having a real difficult time about this, because it's just difficult. I mean, to me, it seems right now it seems to me what you have now seems to be working relatively well.
Madam Chair, can I ask one thing, just one suggestion? Natalie, do you have the comp plan? I think you said you had a couple of different maps.
We have them in front of us. Is there one that you'd want us to look at?
If she's got it up there, that's. You're focusing, you talk about Streeter Road, you talk about all these other roads and stuff. I think what us as council and the mayor are talking about and looking at are obviously, number one, all of the areas inside the municipal line, which is really easy to see, all of the pretty colors and stuff, and that it's bordered by that line. And then some of the other areas that are already zoned, so to speak, with one being at the intersection of County Road 30 and 19, all the way down to the D&D and city public works and stuff, all the way north where Natalie's pointing out right now. Just to kind of corral and get what I'm hearing you guys saying is a focus on properties that are designated what they are right now. And that reddish area on County Road 30 and 19 is what on your map?
That's the
Madam
rural
Chair.
service commercial pink.
Yeah.
Yeah, so right now that is the existing rural
Yep.
commercial area. So I think where we might be getting hung up is on one of my last questions, like how do we handle
Right.
requests to rezone? Because is it unreasonable to think that once it's understood that development rights no longer apply, will the rest of these properties in this area want
Yes.
to rezone? And then are there other areas that, especially if they've already used development rights and now are they realize that they've put themselves in a corner, will they want it? And again, maybe there's some areas that makes sense. If we go this route, maybe there are some areas that they have access to 2 county roads and they're paid, or maybe a collector road of some sort, where it could make sense if that's the route we go. But maybe there's some standards or not necessarily standards, but just maybe there's some thinking that needs to go into this on the front end, so that staff can direct people who come in with an outlet that they want to have rezoned. I'm like, well, that's not gonna work because you're not gonna meet these access requirements that you really need for a commercial developer.
The problem with that is setting a standard and then waiting till somebody comes and tests that standard, is you don't know what you don't know till you don't know it.
I'm just, you were.
No, I
talking-
totally hear you.
talking so broad, I was just trying to.
So anything
correct
that's in the
something
MUSA,
there.
well, anything that's in the MUSA is, in my mind, that's a part of that broader commercial and industrial. The thing that we're talking about right now does not include that, because it's not commercial rural and it's not the transitional commercial rural. right? That's within the MUSA, so that is already something else. So it is everything that is in that pink area, but in my mind, then what is to stop anyone who's all along 19 from being like, well, essentially, and then for me, you know, Greenfield butts up to that, and Greenfield is building residential right now. And so that's why I think it takes a neighborly discussion too, to say, hey, what are some of your plans?
I agree. I'm just
Sure.
saying that we've got those designated areas
Yeah.
are already defined. The rest is
Sure.
rural, residential, rural ag, whatever we define it as. Is
Until,
keeping all those things.
until someone else
Somebody wants
says,
to make a request to say, we can always say no.
And there was a request to rezone the area around the Public Works building to rural commercial already. That concerned me because seeing D and D
yeah,
down on 10 and 19. And I don't think a lot of residential people would like to have that in their backyard because it's not very attractive. It's basically outdoor storage. So again, then that's moving farther south with that. I think as far as the rural commercial too, and maybe we can address this when we update the comp plan, but it's pretty broad, the acceptable uses in a rural commercial area. Somebody may not object to, say, a farmer's market in the rural commercial area, even if it requires some, you know, asphalt or gravel paving or parking, but they would object to a bunch of outdoor storage with a bunch of, you know, vehicles and implements and whatnot in their backyard. So it really depends on what kind of rural commercial. And if we just open it up very broadly and say, this is rural commercial and you can rezone this from rural residential to rural commercial, but it could be anything from outdoor storage to, you know, somebody's hobby farm where they have a retail shop. That's really broad, and it's really going to make a difference on how the neighbors and the neighborhood accept it.
I just also think that is really difficult to answer the question on how do you handle assigned development rights, or how do you handle if something in that pink area is granted more development rights, and then you have somebody else who comes up and makes a request for more development rights because they've exhausted theirs. I feel like because we've tied that to people's investment, I think that that's just a difficult thing to rein in. So how would that be handled? I think at that point in time, you would have to do it on strictly an acreage. If you're going to move away from development rights, then it would have to be, the thing that would have to guide it, oh my gosh, that just would be minimum lot size at that point in time. And then if minimum lot size is not a standard for every type of allowable use in the commercial role, which she just mentioned is very broad, then you would have to attach a new minimum lot size to each allowable use. I guess in my mind, that's the only way for it to make sense. So that would be at least, you know, with the time that I've had to think about it in the last week. So if there's other things that churn, I'll let people know, but I think at this point in time, we should, any other feedback regarding this issue in particular, and then we'll move on to the mini storage and self-storage. I don't want to cut anybody's thoughts off. So if you have anything else left to share in regards to the commercial rural, transitional, commercial rural. Is there any specific question that we haven't addressed that
Okay,
you would like us to make sure we,
I just want to make
touch on?
sure I captured some of this. So in terms of, you don't necessarily have to recommend any changes to impervious surface or setbacks. I'm not hearing that we want to do that, and that's fine. It was more just.
I'm not hearing that I know
At this
what I want to
point-
do.
At this point, okay.
Thanks. Yeah.
So as far as the larger minimum lot size, I'm hearing that, for rural commercial, at one point you had said you would like to see it, possibly at 5 acres and then potentially requiring more for specific uses. Is that an accurate summary, or do you have other thoughts on that? But definitely don't want to go lower than the 2.5.
Correct. That would be an accurate summary of my thoughts.
I agree, but I think leaving it the way it is kind of the consensus right now.
Yeah, so that will be what I share with the council, but I think it's also just important that you have an opportunity to kind of give some initial feedback on these other thoughts, because I don't know that council necessarily agree with that consensus. So I just want to make sure that you have an opportunity to give this initial feedback. So what will happen is we'll go to April 25th council. I'll forward this feedback. And then council at that time will give staff direction to prepare a draft. And then we'll do a joint work session in May over that draft. And then from there, go into a public hearing in June with planning commission. So you will have an opportunity to review the draft that gets adopted. And there will be a public hearing opportunity, as in June is what we're currently projected for. So I don't know exactly what that draft looks like. I'll have more direction from the council on the 25th, but I just want to make sure that I have some feedback on you to incorporate into the draft. Should the direction be, we're going to remove development rates from this area. So how should we incorporate some of these other tidbits?
So that you get an opportunity to speak to both. So
Yeah,
this
exactly.
world.
Great, exactly. So that's what I'll report at this point is, minimum lot size potentially increasing to 5 acres. But to be sensitive to certain uses where it might really need to be 10 acres, such as contractors operations. And then as far as, how do we reassign development rights when part of the property gets rezoned? I think staff would probably recommend that the area that is retained in rural residential, the development rights be reassigned based on the remaining acreage at that point. My only concern is in situations where
Already below.
right, where they might actually end up getting a new development right because of it, because of they already
Yeah.
used it.
Yeah.
But I don't know the solution to that at this point. But I think that would be my staff recommendation. I don't know what your thoughts are on that. I don't want to put words in your mouth as the commission, but that would be likely how I would handle it if it were up to me. And then we talked about the rezoning quite a bit, and then any other feedback, and then I think we can close this part out.
The only other feedback that I would bring up is that my first year here, there were 2 issues regarding development rights that came up, and there was one where people were upset because somebody had purchased a development right from a neighbor. I don't know if y'all remember that issue. I have a crazy memory. And so, but then neighbors turned out. And so while this may not seem like it's a big deal, I think that that it would be to capture the neighborhood, the rural residential neighborhood feel regarding development rates would be an interesting step in this process. Because both times that it came up, even when it wasn't, there seemed to be something that wasn't on the up and up, even though everything was on the up and up, people were very concerned about that. And it was because the appearance of being awarded in a development right is the appearance of what happened. That's the outcome of that situation. And it's not what happened. It was purchased. But all that to say, so now in a situation where potentially some people are being given additional development rights, I think that that's just going to have a strong reaction from that community. So I'd be interested in seeing if there's any way to capture, I mean, we do have a way to capture that, and that would be the public hearing. So that's the last thing that I would say regarding that. And then we'll move into the, and then the other is that I just reserved my right to have more opinions if we specify that we're moving in one direction or the other.
I think one more thing I want to say on this, it does sound like a lot of the times the community gets upset, and even the people here, they get upset because they don't know what's happening and it feels like it's being sprung on them. And a lot of times the public input comes after all the discussion is done and everything's been put into writing. And then they're saying, well, yeah, you'll put down my comments, but does it matter because the decision's already been made? So I don't know if that's perception or if that, feels kind of like reality to people, but is there a way to involve the public in a way that they feel included, that they feel like they're being heard? There's a lot of change going on in Corcoran right now. And I've been in Corcoran for 37 years. There hasn't been a lot of change, especially out in the rural area. Amazingly little change. And now all of a sudden, I mean, we see the explosion in the Musa area, and we're even seeing a lot of lots, big, large lots going up for sale and roads going through and neighborhoods going up. People need to know what's going on.
So I will say that the city council meetings, there are a number of public comment opportunities for input to be received.
Mhm.
And I can certainly, if people want to submit comments on this discussion tonight, I can certainly forward that to the city council packet on the 25th. This is the lack of input on this. There wasn't a public comment opportunity, and we don't have a quorum as of 9 o'clock. So that's why we had to make that announcement at the beginning of the meeting. Because we're on 45 minutes, we still have 2 topics to go through, and one of them is a huge table. So, and then as far as other public input opportunities, we did do a business community survey where we asked for input on some of this, not necessarily the development rights, but we asked for input on performance standards and zoning, what's working, what's not working, from everyone that is either a business operating on the properties that are guided and zoned for this area, and landowners. So maybe if there's no business there today, but they're a landowner that might look at developing. So we we request that business survey to, we mailed it out. And we requested that people participate if they wanted to. And so we do have some data we'll be able to share with the council on the 25th. And then as far as additional public comment opportunities outside of the public hearing, it would just change our work plan. And it could potentially
Right.
delay some of the ability to move forward on the projected timeline. I have no problem with that, except for I know that we're trying to be sensitive to the timeline that we have. So that would have to be direction from council that we're deviating from that to include some additional public outreach and public comment opportunities.
Perfect. Okay, so task 2 is to take a look at the mini storage and self-storage. There are some questions that we have before we can move forward, but basically there are 2 types of storage units, right? I mean, do we need to go into that? Because one of the questions was, do you want to allow indoor storage and just not the outdoor storage? So do you want to explain
What that
the
means.
distinction between the 2?
Yeah, so mini storage, self-storage, typically, what comes to mind with that is the drive-up units. There are some cities that no longer allow those to be developed, but have allowed indoor storage to be developed as a way to kind of minimize the footprint that's needed. It doesn't really answer the concerns about employment opportunities, if that's the general concern behind it. But it could potentially alleviate some of the footprint that it takes up on land that's zoned for industrial is or it's allowed in our industrial and commercial rural districts. So
Basically, it doesn't provide a whole lot of revenue for the footprint that it takes up.
So the staff report explains that tax revenue is really not the concern. It's a great tax base, especially for the services in return. But I believe the concern is more of the lack of jobs it generates.
At this point in time, I am aware of a number, I mean, primarily as you enter the city and then along the 55 corridor. And I feel like there is accessible storage. So I would be in favor of discontinuing the use. My only concern is that in discontinuing the use, I know that in Maple Grove, the Becker Furniture shares itself with an indoor self-storage. And so if you completely disallow the use in your code, and then eventually 40 years from now, everything's built out and now you're like, okay, there's some room for some flexibility. How do you navigate that? Because you've basically eliminated it from your code. And is there any way to, instead of doing that approach, to take a different approach in terms of not allowing any more new ones to come in? I know we don't numerically limit licensing like we do with other.
So like having indoor storage units as an accessory use, is that what you're suggesting?
No. I mean, like if we said, okay, you know what, we're not gonna take this as a use in any longer. So it's no longer an allowable use, right? But 40 years down the road, you've got part of the Corcoran industrial park that now sits empty and somebody wants to move in and be like, hey, we could turn this into indoor self-storage, but you vacated it from your code by saying it's no longer an allowable
So
use.
it'd be a zoning ordinance amendment at that
Okay.
time to allow it at that point.
Could you just put a moratorium on it, or? have you
There
already
is a
done that?
moratorium on it right now.
Yeah, and they're just a year while you
Yeah,
decide
40
what you want to
years.
do to move forward. Well, I think you
We
don't
could, or you
continually
probably
renew
have one.
moratoriums. you have to
No,
make a
we-
decision.
There's no intent to renew it at this point, so we have to be very efficient with the work plan as it's outlined right now.
And my greatest concern, I mean, one of my greatest concerns is just the lack of employment opportunity, but also when you get the amount of the same type of business, it's homogeneous. And I think that, moving it into a disallowable use would ask landowners to consider, or future business owners to consider other alternatives, because there are some things that can be done with that land.
There's not much you can do with the mini storage once, there's a lot of them out there, and at some point it's gonna reach a saturation point, and then they're gonna be vacant and not rentable, maybe, I don't know. A lot of stuff
I know
out
there were
guess,
some
but-
public safety concerns, or have been, and I know there were some questions regarding that in the past.
It doesn't seem like something that could easily be converted to another use.
That's what I was thinking is, yeah,
Once it isn't profitable anymore to have it as a mini storage, then.
right. Also because most of them, there's no septic or water, running on the property either. So it's,
You'd be looking at redeveloping the site.
Right.
It's no longer a use, which is kind of true of anything. Eventually, sometimes that's what happens to sites if they get redeveloped. So I totally hear what you're saying. And I think it's fair to, like, what happens if the market gets saturated, especially if that's our primary use in our industrial areas. It's not our primary use right now, but it certainly could continue to, we continue to see requests for it. I think as far as your comments about public safety, I did speak with one of our officers, and he can recall a couple of fires that have occurred in the units that they've been called out to. And then there's been a couple of instances where people have used their units as they're not supposed to, and had unpermitted work completed to, like, add a mezzanine. And so then our public safety team got called out to literally unbury someone from when the mezzanine collapsed. So there's been those instances. I asked, what about burglary? We in Corcoran haven't really experienced instances where someone was caught stealing in the units. It did note that sometimes these units can be used as a place to store items that have been stolen. Again, we don't have any data in terms of that happening in Corcoran. It's just something in terms of the public safety lens of their concerns with the use. I think those are a couple of items that you touched on.
I'd be curious on how many of those units become makeshift residences.
I think that was a couple of things they said too. There's a couple of times where homeless people will end up kind of sneaking into the storage units. And some of that is handled, but then you have all people on TikTok giving tips on how to do
yes,
it.
on how to do it. Yep. Or YouTube. Yep. Here's
So
how to
it's-
live
it's
in a
not
storage
perfect
unit.
science. And I would say that happens with indoor just as much as drive up storage units. It is a concern, but it's not necessarily something that, again, there's just not a lot of employees on site to help monitor it. Sometimes they usually have some kind of security system. But it's, it hasn't necessarily been enough to completely stop it, because I know our police have been called to a couple instances regarding that.
And in all fairness, someone's mishandling of a business the way it's supposed to be operating should not be the only
Absolutely.
thing that we think about when considering whether it's an allowable use. However, taking into consideration how many we have in our city already, that's really the primary reason that, and the lack of employment opportunity I would suggest we move in a different direction.
Yeah, I would agree.
Do anyone else have any comments regarding the mini storage or self-storage at this point in time? If they were to move forward with continuing it to be an allowable use, does anyone have any recommendations that they would attach to the self-storage or mini storage that you would want to be added to the standards that are already outlined?
If they keep allowing mini storage,
Yeah, if they decide to continue making it an allowable use, are there any additional standards other than the ones that are on page 7 of 8? They're listed the existing standards for reference. Are there any standards that you would want to see added in addition to the ones that are outlined there?
well, the part here where they said, existing standards for reference units are to be used for dead storage only, not to be used for retailing, auto repair, human habitation, any commercial activity. So in St. Michael, they've built these things up by the 94, 210, I do believe. And they're called Supermax Hideaways. And it's literally like a man cave on steroids. And they have lofts and you could put a whole kitchen in there and you can drive
Wow.
your toys right into there and then everybody gets together and admires all the toys, you know, they probably live there, who knows? So I don't know if that would even fall under this same category. I don't know
Is
what
that
that
considered
is,
self-storage,
frankly.
mini storage?
I do think they are considered
Are
self-storage,
they?
mini storage.
I
yeah.
think they are. I had to look it up. I went by and I saw the development and I saw this sign and I said, well, what is that? And when I looked it up, it's like, wow, that's different.
Must be.
So units are not to be used for retailing, auto repair, human habitation, so.
So maybe
Human
typically we
habitation.
Don't allow for, we don't want to see necessarily like a septic system because we're trying to avoid
Yeah.
people from staying there for too long. So I think I think that under our current code, that would not be something that really would make sense with our current standards.
Don't have to
We
worry
could
about
certainly, are you saying that you would like to see that or you?
No, I'm just wondering if it falls under there and if.
Yeah, I think it would fall under there, but we could certainly look at that standard to make sure that that does cover it, and is it, if, you know.
Well, the
It's
fact
not
that
meant
we
for
don't have city
recreational
water and
space.
sewer might kind of
Yeah.
keep them from going too far overboard with that, but
That's true.
And then the parking, that's the other thing that isn't explicitly addressed for reference. I don't believe, in terms of, but that's also one of the things is it's usually been only drive up because then there's a limitation on the total number of times you're supposed to, your hours that you're supposed to be parked in front of your self-storage. So I think that just by default of not having parking, offered, that deters more of that type of business. But so it's not explicitly called out, so that would be the only question that I would have if we're making adjustments. Is do we have,
Is there a requirement for
Standard.
impervious surfaces?
oh, that's a good
It
question.
would, it depends on what district, so if in our rural commercial, it would still be that 50% impervious surface. And then in our industrial, I think it's more like 80. If I remember off the top of my head, I believe it's 80 in industrial.
What about landscape buffering?
Landscape buffering would apply for new storage proposed at this point. If it's surrounded by a residential district, so it would depend on what type of residential district is surrounding it, but.
What about anything? I mean, it would be nice just to kind of tuck those away.
Oh, you're saying add that as a standard,
Yeah.
additional buffering?
Just to play the other side of that, the concern is that the more hideaway you make it, the more you,
Yeah.
you know, the more you kind of encourage, but I hear what your intent is to kind of provide more of a buffering between that where it meets residential neighborhoods, not necessarily make it less visible altogether. If I'm hearing you correctly.
I think the best reason for saying we have enough is just there may be better uses of the land we have, but who knows, maybe it's only a 20-year deal anyways, and then it'll be done and then the land will be used for something else. I mean, the rural area isn't going to be developed with city water and sewer for another, what, 10, 20, 30?
Oh, rural, so 2050 is our next plan, and I don't, obviously it's not my decision, but I doubt.
It's a good
this is
20
gonna
years
really
out.
move out, so I think that we're talking at least 30 years before some of these areas would even really.
30 years is a
Further
long
incorporate.
time.
We have a lot of land in the museum,
Yeah.
so I don't.
I mean,
yeah.
even if it's not a great land use, you know, by the time we need that land for something else, they're gonna be old and probably torn down anyways, so.
So you would be in favor of saying that it would be an okay, like an allowable use right now, still?
So keep in mind, it's
I don't
also
wanna
our
see a
industrial
lot of them
areas
out there,
too,
but-
outside of the rural.
It's
So
the
it's
bottom.
Also the purple,
The-
other
on
than
the
the
map.
northeast district area.
That's the area where they'd be allowed.
Yeah, so they could, so right now they'd be allowed in the purple in the southeast, southwest, I'm sorry. It could be allowed, in the existing downtown area that's purple. It cannot, it's not allowed use at all in our northeast district, so the northeast corner, that purple could not have storage today. And then it's also allowed within the rural commercial area that you're talking about.
I wouldn't like to see them in the downtown. I would not like to see them in the downtown area. I think there's much better use of the downtown area land.
I would agree. We already have
According
one.
to our downtown
yep.
plan, they wouldn't fit. I mean, they wouldn't be appropriate.
Well,
for
and
that.
to be clear, it's, I call that our old downtown area.
Yeah.
It's like our
90s
our
growth.
downtown
Oh, the
industrial
light-
park, so
the
it's
light
not the
purple.
downtown mixed use. So
Oh,
it's the light purple,
light
it's not the
purple.
pink.
Okay,
Just to
yeah.
be clear, so I apologize.
It's like a little bit south of
Yeah.
10, yeah,
Gotcha.
and then on the west side.
Yeah.
Okay, are we ready to tackle task 3, which is the comprehensive review of commercial and industrial districts? And this is the table. So Natalie, do you want to start by just specifically walking us through the table, unless you want us to just ask, did anyone have
Why
questions?
don't we actually deal with the easier questions
Okay.
first? And Corinne, since you're the one that attended, I'm sorry, Madam Chair, I
That's okay.
apologize. That since you're the one that attended December 5th, did that summary accurately reflect the discussion?
Yes,
Okay.
yep,
All right, so then, we can get back to as far as, is there anything further to be added at the end? I just wanted to make sure that getting forward to council still made sense. And then, as far as the table, Dwight here actually is the one that put it together. I can find it. And so I would say there's some things that I believe we've talked about in terms of why do we call out some uses specifically and
And
others
others.
not?
yep.
Why do we allow grocery stores in C2
Yes.
but not C1?
And if somebody could just explain what the difference would be between C1 and C2, I think that would be
Sure,
helpful.
so, C1 is a neighborhood commercial, so the idea is these are, Kendra, correct me if I'm wrong. The idea is these are more, smaller scale commercial uses. So one
A
way
corner
that it's
store.
reflected is we don't allow department stores in neighborhood
Sure.
commercial, but we could allow it under C2, which is our community commercial. So these are a bit higher volume commercial uses, and they're more oriented towards motorists than a neighborhood setting. Does that help a little bit?
Yep,
Okay.
Did-
you
did you guys get that? Or it was clear to you to begin with? And I was just going to need some direction, okay. And so right now you are indicating, going back to the grocery stores, that grocery stores are permitted in C2,
Mhm.
called out specifically, but not in C1.
But we do allow retail use.
In C1.
Well, what's the difference? So where can we simplify it? I think is some of the, like, where does it make sense to call out specific uses? Does this make sense? What we currently have, or do we make uses a little broader? For neighborhood commercial, is it better just to limit the size if the idea is supposed to be a size scale, not necessarily worry about the specific use as much?
Yep.
Or is it really a design issue? Does it size, it's really not the matter, we just want to make sure the design works and, have different standards for that instead of necessarily focusing again on calling out an ice, I don't think we call out ice cream shop, but you know,
Sure. Right.
sometimes it gets a little ridiculous. like
Yep,
that.
it's too specific, yep. So when I think of the difference between that C1 and that C2, I think you touched on it in terms of motorists. So I think that how much traffic are we driving to this location? So instead of specifically, indicating what we perceive to be the businesses that are going to, because I think that it is entirely possible to have a small corner, a grocer, you know what I mean, like a corner store for lack of something else, but it's not something that a lot of people are gonna do their primary grocery shopping at, so it's not gonna drive a lot of traffic. So rather than calling out the specific use, I guess I would look at the intention behind why specific businesses have been placed in that residential, and instead look at the common themes in those businesses. Do you know what I mean? And then try to create a definition from that. Maybe that's not,
I'm not disagreeing.
okay. At least that was what I initially thought. I also think, I think it's a lot. And so a part of what I would want to do is sometimes when I think about, like when I've thought about doing stuff with my house where I live, the more bogged down the paperwork is, it sends me in two directions, trying to figure out like, what is the Green Acres property tax program? When I try to go down that rabbit hole, if it is confusing, it is so much harder to persevere and push through or have the right people to ask. And so it's a deterrent. And so I think that is one of the goals in simplifying this is we don't want anything about the process to deter a visionary or a dreamer from coming to bring their business here. So that I think would be a goal in simplifying. Also, I think to make it easier for all of us to be able to administer and understand, like from a staff perspective. But I guess I would want to make it friendly for the user. So somebody could say, hey, I really want to create this type of business or bring it. Is there a place where I fit in Corcoran? How can we make that the fewest, like, how can we simplify that process for them? So that there's not a lot of frustration prior to them getting the answer they seek. That's some of my initial thoughts.
Is there opportunities in the comp plan to redo some of the zoning too and kind of try to make this easier? There's what's it, form-based codes that you can have written up for a city that make it easier to do certain things, like if you want a walkable downtown, you get a form-based code that would kind of guide somebody through, you know, what are the uses for a particular business, and it makes it really easy for somebody who is maybe an entrepreneur, somebody starting a new business that wants to just quick look at that and go, can I do that here? And it's just laid out and in a much easier, simpler way to understand, and it's zoned so that it's friendly to whatever the purpose is that your city wants for that area. Now, that may require, you know, hiring a particular consultant who knows how to deal with form-based codes and put something in place, help us put something in place that would really make it much easier and maybe eliminate some of the variances and conditional use permits and all this other kind of stuff that council has to take up on a regular basis.
Madam Chair, can I just comment on that?
Yeah, please.
Just for the group, just to understand, the true form-based code really doesn't talk about uses. A true form-based code says if your building meets these design parameters, setbacks, height, materials, it's permitted. And one of the challenges, and we've done several, one of the challenges that we have with councils, not just in Minnesota, but in other states that we work, is councils are reluctant to give up their discretionary review. So from a business perspective, form-based codes are fantastic. It's very clear what I need to do. I can go in, get my building permit and move on. But it does take your discretion away as the planning commission because we don't have very many CUPs or variances because people just do that. So I love the idea and it's something that's certainly worth talking about, but for the purpose of Natalie's work, I mean, I think we're focused on the uses. But one thing we've been doing a lot more for cities is doing a hybrid code where we develop graphics that are, you'd see in the form-based codes, which is really one page with pictures that shows if I want to develop in C1, this is what I need to do. And it's right there and it's a picture. I don't need to understand words about setbacks and things like that.
And then
But
just
you
some,
still have use tables.
yeah, and some of the tables and stuff that they have are just much easier to read.
I think what Dwight did with this is something we're doing a lot is we're not doing in each district uses, we're just doing a use table, period. One use table, all districts. I think that's a lot easier too.
Yeah. I just had questions on like civic buildings such as city hall, libraries, fire stations is permitted everywhere except for transitional commercial rural.
Yeah, transition commercial is kind of a holding zone for properties identified for eventual rural commercial. So it tends to be still used for residential. It's still like a residential district. And then I'll read the actual description here. Represents transition areas that have been identified as practical and generally suitable for future development as part of the rural commercial district. Let's provide a holding zone until the landowner makes application for development. At this time, the city may rezone the affected property to rural commercial consistent with the land use plan. And so permitted uses are pretty typical of what we see in our rural commercial, such as daycare facilities, dwelling, seasonal produce stands and residential. For some reason, agriculture isn't a permitted use, but I feel like that's an oversight. So if you bring all seasonal produce stands, I don't see why we know about
Right.
agriculture, but yeah, that's.
There were just so many more things that were permissible in the commercial rural than in the transitional commercial rural. And I guess so if it's supposed to mirror, I don't understand, like, yeah,
The point on the traditional or the transitional was we didn't want, the council at the time didn't want people staying there. So
okay,
you can continue to operate as you are, which you're right, should include ag, because that's what most of them are. But that at the point when you wanted to operate a business, then you move.
Then it has to
the
rezone.
Rural commercial.
gotcha. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Okay. So I don't know specifically, the table is helpful. Thank you, Dwight. Is there any other, I mean, like, I feel like I would need to like look through it line by line if what we're looking for is, hey, what do we need to change specifically? And so like, I would be happy to continue doing that as we work towards that next time frame. I think this task number 3 was the farthest out. If there's immediate feedback that you're looking for tonight, I would say, yes, there's room for simplification. What's missing from the table, would be, gosh,
I already know for you, it's the, meat
Excuse me.
shops.
yes,
Talk.
The what?
Gentlemen, all due respect, this is their meeting, please. We've listened to you guys many, many times. We're asking for these 3 people's input, so please. Thank you, Madam Chair.
it would be the butcher shop. So right now, I don't know how, I mean, people from our city are having to outsource to other locations, and the secondary location that a lot of these folks were using after we lost our butcher here in the city, it has now changed ownership as well. And so, yes, I know that is one thing that I would like to see added on there. Where does it make sense?
Or do we simplify it to the point where it falls under?
Something else, a different use.
Yeah.
I know. And so I guess, so I will say that while I looked through the answer to the questions that are called out in here in terms of where does it make sense for one to be included in a district over another, those specific questions, I really just tagged in the back of my mind that this was the farthest one out. And so my commitment to continue reviewing those and kind of make some specific decisions is where I'm at with those in terms of what should be permitted versus a conditional use permit. The question specifically was raised about animals, I believe, in the,
Yeah, keeping of animals is an accessory use in
Yes.
all of our districts, so that makes sense, and some of our MUSA districts stuff.
so you know me, I'm gonna say yes,
Okay.
right? Like, I guess the more, well, okay, I know that it may not always, but one of the things we had talked about specifically in some of the Northeast districts was the encouragement of restaurants where it's sort of this on-site, right? That's generally not going to be animals, because generally not going to be,
But if it's
right?
open,
But maybe chickens, I don't know, to supply the eggs. But I know there is a restaurant in Duluth that does that, and they have rooftop, it's like hatcheries for a lot of the fish that they supply the restaurant. So it's not unheard of. I guess that would be the only reason that I would think that animals would needed to be kept in that area, but
Just trying to think of like those kind of trendy uses where there's like goat yoga or something. where the
For
goats-
sure.
Yeah.
for sure. But beyond that, I think that sometimes those things self-eliminate
Sure.
in terms of it being permissible, but it just never being utilized. I don't know if that makes sense.
Could I have them as accessory uses, keeping of animals?
Yes.
Yeah.
So that means it is allowable.
As an accessory use, it's allowable.
In
all of
every-
our commercial,
every-
like, districts, yeah.
I guess it doesn't really specify though that it's just like primarily livestock, right? I mean,
So keeping of animals.
I'm thinking cat cafe. That's like a big thing. Have you guys had never been?
No, I've
you-
heard of it.
you
I've not
pay
been there.
And one side is the restaurant and the other side is all the cats. And like, I mean, would that fall into this
I think so.
Okay, so I'm just trying to.
Go at the end of the day.
I think that they are, I don't know, I think the hope is that they get I have never been, but I think the hope is that they eventually, it's like they get adopted out, or I don't think they live there permanently, but, anyway, that's why I'm thinking, to allow something like that, cat cafe in the area, where maybe there's a reason to just not eliminate it altogether. We have a few more minutes. Do you guys have some thoughts you'd like to share, questions you want to ask regarding the table? Is that something that you guys feel comfortable with, that if we just continue to review this and offer specific
Well,
feedback,
and
or do you need to have that tonight?
No, I think you're right. This is the one that's furthest out. So we have some time to be thoughtful. So maybe we take it in chunks. Maybe next meeting, we just look at the first page and go line by line.
Okay,
You know what I mean? And then just take it instead of, because maybe it's just too overwhelming right now with it being like, well, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we could probably take at least we could probably take 4 meetings just looking at it page by page. And
for a few minutes.
yeah,
So I also feel like what's helpful for me sometimes is to understand there's an intent, right? That isn't explicit in the table. And so I would appreciate that just for the sake of being thorough, because then I could confer like, what is the intent behind this, or what was the reason behind it? And it can help us get at that standard rather than the specificity of a particular business.
I can try. Just keep in mind that Kendra and I didn't necessarily
Create
write
it.
all of
Sure,
these,
sure.
and some of
Yep.
this might have been by committee, so it
Yeah.
might have been that it made sense. to
Sure,
the
then,
someone in the
but it
room,
doesn't now.
But yeah, the intent might not be very clear. But
If-
where there might be some reasoning that I can evaluate, I
Sure.
can certainly try to share that.
I feel confident that with the experience that you guys have, you would be able to speak to a reasonable amount, you would give enough of a reason why it should still be allowed or why it should not be allowed, if that conversation comes up.
Natalie, what I would like to see on the table, because it's really a nice inclusive table, but if you could do a legend for CR, TCR, C1, C2, BP, 1A. All of these headings here.
You had
Like
the
a
nice
different color?
legend. No, you had the nice legend in your presentation, but it just isn't
there's no
included in the
legend
table
on here.
itself.
In my presentation?
Well, if you flip back where it says you had all of the uses, you indicated what the codes were for. And so at the top, you
Yeah, at the very
indicate
top.
what
I can
PAU,
do that, absolutely.
but if
Yeah.
you put CR, TCR, C1,
I'm
C2.
sorry. Yeah,
I'm new enough, they're just, I
Sure.
mean, other than the
So for the abbreviation.
commercial, residential and transitional.
Right, just for the zoning, because all of the explanation of the abbreviations for the uses, that is included on the table, but just not a legend for the zoning.
Okay, we
Right?
can do that.
Yes,
Okay.
Do you want it on every page, or would it be sufficient just to put on the first
just one page
Okay.
is fine, first page.
Okay, we can do
It
that.
makes me think I've got to page back through everything to try to find it. I'm sure it's somewhere.
Well, especially when this is your second meeting, you're probably,
Yeah.
yeah, I didn't even think of that, so I apologize, but we'll make sure that I have it.
Okay,
So then I guess then just the catch-all of any additional thoughts. To be forwarded to council on the 25th regarding the overall updates that weren't captured already. Either in the summary or tonight's discussion.
I thought that you captured, especially I was thinking since the 2 other commissioners couldn't be here tonight. So when I was reading through it, I was just making sure that the things that they were really invested in were included in that discussion, and they were. So I feel comfortable with what you had already put together regarding that December 5th meeting. And so, the height, that was the other thing that we haven't talked about. I'm sorry. So one of the things that has been discussed is especially in the areas where
Oh, the
this,
transition.
where this abuts to residential neighborhoods. Is there anything that you would like to comment on or suggest for transitioning from the, the height to some of these? And then also the breaking up of the larger buildings. And then I think the other question was impervious surface for lot instead of flat. Am I correct?
Yes, so the height transition that is being contemplated by council at this point is potentially within 100 feet of a residential zoning district, a building can only be 35 feet, which is consistent with what's allowed in residential. And then after 100 feet, it can go up to 45 feet, and that's not finalized. That was just kind of the idea that,
Suggestion.
yeah, that we're thinking through. So that's one component, and then, I'm actually not too sure what you mean by breaking up buildings further than what we already have.
No, just requiring windows, I thought was part of
Oh,
it,
yeah,
breaking up on
yeah.
the facade so that it wasn't just
Requiring
one large,
windows
yeah,
on that first level.
yes.
And then I'm so sorry.
No, it was regarding impervious surface
Yes,
for
okay,
a
impervious surface, so we're running into, more than one variance or PUD request where they want the, impervious surface coverage calculated on a plat basis
Yep.
instead of on a per lot basis, and when you have stormwater system, that actually could make a lot of sense. Another issue that we're running into is our industrial districts, where we're gonna see higher amounts of truck use naturally, because we allow for manufacturing and things like that. They wanna have a shared truck court in the back, between two buildings, and so they want two different lots, and then the problem, there's no setback for the parking lot then, because it's a shared court space, so are we okay with having some flexibility called out for that as well? So those are two areas where we're seeing a lot of requests to either for a variance or PUD, and anytime we're seeing it again and again,
Then you
I
want
feel
to
like
talk
it
about
makes sense to reevaluate our code, because it seems like our code's updated then, if that's the current way to develop for those uses.
And so when you talk about the impervious surface for the stormwater ponding, you're saying that that makes sense because if they're doing such as a business park, they're
Mhm.
going to want to have fewer stormwater basins, right? Rather than collecting that in
On
each
a-
individual larger
Exactly,
ponds. Okay.
yeah.
And so that I mean, I would be in favor of as long as the percentage doesn't shift, right? Much when all of a sudden you begin doing it on a lot instead of per plat. I love the idea of a transitional because I think it is respectful for the neighbors. I think like the size of buildings that are being built today are different than what's been typical in the past. So I guess what primarily comes to mind is in the industrial, just those large warehouses. I think I'm trying to consider if it makes sense in the like Northeast district where you're gonna have that residential up against what's supposed to be some of your business park. And I know business park can be multi-level as well. So I don't know if there's enough of a reason to make a distinction. Or if you would just need to handle them both the same. But if it could be accommodated, I think it sounds like a great idea. To make that a gradual transition to a height. Where it's at its, most dense or within the industrial park rather than around the edge, that to be where your greatest height is. And then I think for both the employees working inside of the building and for people who are looking at the building, anytime you can break up a facade with natural light, it's never a bad thing. But I also don't know how that works on the inside of the building, right? Because I'm not the building owner. So I would wonder if it couldn't be met with some other sort of architectural feature rather than specifically calling out a window. I guess that's my initial thoughts. And you would maybe be able to speak to that better than.
No, I think you can't, I'm not sure if you would be able to do it by breaking up the mass, because that obviously is gonna add cost, but you could certainly handle it through, different materials. Possible, small indentations in the facade, things like that.
Any last thoughts? Okay, so this is something just to corral, we're coming back to.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
so
we will
we're not at a finale, but the first initial set of comments and so just saying, we can all look through it on our own in our own time as well. And then May would be sort of the next opportunity where we would have a work session around this.
Yeah, this time it's a joint work session is scheduled for May
23rd.
Thank you.
Yeah.
23rd at 5:30. So mark your calendars because that's not a usual meeting date for you all. Or a meeting time. And it would be very helpful to have, the different perspectives of our planning commissioners there to
Are
take
those-
a look at the first
Are those
draft.
dates in here somewhere?
I believe it, yeah, I believe the work plan, in that packet for the commercial industrial update.
It indicates it on the timeline in
Oh,
that, yeah.
So page 4 of that packet.
Okay, and so then anything else, I mean, that is sort of a planning project update, I guess, anything else that needs to be called out specifically?
Usually we just, confirming.
Yep,
the-
receipt of the packet. Or the update,
I'm sorry, we usually confirm the, liaison calendar, if that's.
oh, yes, yep, yep. And so then you have, and it will be your first time now, I think it's always riveting to show up in person. But you are welcome to join via Zoom as well, if that works better for you, but then next week, next Thursday works for you.
Yes.
Okay, well, I'm gonna trust that you guys can look at that, and if for any reason it doesn't work, you can, let Natalie know, and then she would be able to, ask for somebody else to cover it. And then,
I'm sorry, Madam Chair, sometimes with the city council report, sometimes we ask for an update from the liaison.
Yep.
but, We could still do that. too.
yep. So if you can make it brief, sir, is there anything that you would like to share with us for your city council update?
We've got so much going on, guys. You guys have done a great job digging into this stuff. You've given us input. We get input from hundreds of folks and such. So I believe the council and the mayor is here tonight also. If you haven't met him, we are listening to everybody, doing everything we can. To do some of this stuff, we've got to make some decisions that are good decisions, as you guys have said. They're gonna be sensible and stuff and well thought out, and I think that's what we're doing. The time you guys have spent tonight is a fraction of what needs to be spent on this. But we do have timelines, we do have things that we need to deliver to residents, landowners, developers, all those things. We do need to deliver some information. So I think we're accelerating stuff. Natalie, great job putting all this together tonight. Dwight, Kendra, thanks for being here, and thank you guys for being here. I know it's a beautiful night and such, so a lot of great information this evening. Thank you so much.
All right,
Any
thank you.
questions about all the stuff that's going on?
Do you have any questions for council?
If I can ask one question,
Sure.
Natalie? The page 2, Coachling Center,
Oh,
has that been suspended? Has that been done? I get a tremendous number of folks calling from the neighborhood as far as that status.
yes, so the applicant provided us with a request to extend the review by another 60 days. He has until May 10th to decide whether or not he wants to move forward with May
Okay.
23rd meeting, or if he wants to withdraw the application at this time. So
It's on here as April 28th or 20, excuse me.
It was March 28th, because that's when it was scheduled to go before the
Yeah.
council, but it sounds like he submitted a request for an
that may have
extension.
been an updated report.
Oh, what did I do? No, I've been doing it all week. I've been thinking this is still March, so it
Okay.
is April. That's my fault.
Yeah,
Cancel it.
it's not gonna go in April. If it
Okay.
does go, it'd be May 23rd at this point.
A ton of different things going on, the commercial industrial development standards. We've got a request in front of us, and thus the moratorium for us to focus staff very, very heavily on deciding some of those things, and your input tonight has been great, so. Thank you, guys. You guys got any questions for me? And like I said, the mayor is here also. I'm sure he won't turn down the opportunity. I know you're on a timeline.
All right, no questions here. So with that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn tonight's meeting.
Second.
All right, so all those in favor? Anyone opposed? Great. Thank you. Official
That's the best
adjournment.
part of being the chair.
Sorry, I'm just a fill-in.